So thanks for attending our panel discussion tonight. One of the things that we've learned over the last few months is that it's very challenging to try to do a typical Q&A in a virtual format. We can see some people's names, but not everyone's names. Some people come in as telephone numbers, and it's hard to really get a good flow of who wants to ask a question or who is ready to ask a question. So the format we chose tonight was to ask everybody to submit their questions in advance through a Google form. And we're going to go through, and I'm going to essentially ask our panelists the
public
question.
input meeting on.
Hey, Ann, can you mute?
Sorry.
That's all right. It sounds like you're eating chicharrones. But that's good. That's it's kind of like being at the movie theaters. If everybody will keep their mute on, it just helps with the overall audio quality and the flow. I'm going to introduce our panelists in just a minute. We do have High Five Media recording this. So if there's anybody that has any concerns or would not want to be part of that recording, we would ask that you would just kind of sign off now. I don't think there's a lot of sensitive information that would be displayed, but we do want to have an opportunity to share this video for those who may not be able to attend tonight. And if we're good to move forward, again, I've mentioned already that if you do have some type of bandwidth limitations, turning your video off can help. So tonight we have with us as our panelist Superintendent Phil Qualman. Phil, if you can just say hello or wave.
Hi, I'm Phil Qualman. I'm at Battle Mountain High School in the lecture hall right now. I've got some members of the Technology and Communications Department, and I've got board member Ted Long with me as well.
That's great. Ted, thanks for being there. And we also have Assistant Superintendent Melissa Ruewalldin. Can you say hi, Melissa?
Hi, and I would like to apologize ahead of time if my 3 children come tromping in here while I'm talking, just to let you know. The dog may bark and the kids are outside until it rains. So.
Fortunately, we're in the kid business, so we're good to go there. And then Amy Kanjorski is also on from Wisconsin at her dad's house. Amy is our Executive Director of Exceptional Student Services. Amy, would you mind saying hello real quick?
Absolutely. I'm the 808 phone number that's probably jumping in, and like the kid jumping in, I may have my dad or random other guests just coming in and out of the room. I tried to get them to not do that, but you never know.
So
my dad turns 85 tomorrow, so I had to come home and celebrate that occasion.
Oh, that's fantastic. We may all have to sing him happy birthday before we're done. Happy birthday to him. You know, when we submitted our questions, we ended up with about 88 responses so far. There were a lot of comments. So what I tried to do with Taylor Lower and Eric Martinez, my 2 team members, is to go through and look for common themes, commonalities, and tried to organize the questions in a way where we can answer questions. It may not be your specific question, but it will hopefully ring true to you that it's very similar to your question, and you get a satisfactory answer that way. We've also tried to work in most of the comments. You know, anybody guess what the most common comment was? Of course, it was, let's all go back to school. And, you know, that's what we want to do too. We're in the kid business, and our teachers are, you know, they've dedicated their lives, their career, their education to being with children and having relationships with kids and helping them learn and grow. So as an organization, we're all anxious to get back to school just as soon as it's safe and healthy to do that. So we do recognize that many people share that same sentiment. So we won't spend a lot of time on that, although it will come up in the comments and questions. Phil had mentioned that Ted Long, a board member, is in the room. I can't see. Are there other board members online? If so, I'll pause just a moment. And if you can unmute yourself and say hello. Oh, I see Kelly.
I'm busted eating too because I had my camera off, but I'm here and want to hear what everybody has to say and the questions and the responses. So excuse my eating, and I'm going to turn my camera off and mute myself.
Very good. Others may join us as time permits. So, like I said, we did have about 88 questions. This follows a survey that we sent to roughly 8,160 emails that comprises our parent email list and our staff email list. The board members reviewed kind of an overview of that survey. We got a lot of very valuable information from that survey, and naturally there's information in the survey that overlaps with the questions that we received through the form. So I think we'll get to a little bit of both of those. We did share the survey results through our trail marker, and it went right back out to those 8,160 people. So hopefully you've had a chance to see that. Phil, if I were to turn it over to you for a moment, do you want to talk a little bit about the general results of the survey?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'd like to just start by demonstrating some gratitude for all the folks who are online. We've got, looks like almost 70 people online, and I know only about a dozen of us are staff or Eagle County personnel. So that's exciting. I'm glad to see people engaged in the conversation. Also, just want to remind people that this is a process. We've been talking about planning this fall's school year for the last 6 weeks, and it's going to continue for another 6 weeks until school starts. The survey was a huge piece of how we're collecting information, but it's not the only piece. This forum tonight, the Q&A that we received from families, and the forum that we do tomorrow night in Spanish are going to help inform us for the plan moving forward, as well as the work that we do with the Colorado Department of Education and our local public health department, as well as the governor's office. So our process is very inclusive of public voice, of parent voice, of student and teacher voice, and we're going to try to get back to normal as much as we can for as long as we can.
Thank you, Phil. I think it might be a good idea to hear from each of the board members, just kind of a grounding statement or just an introductory comment or remark about the prospects of going back to school. Melissa, would you like to maybe start us off and share some comments that you may have?
I'd love to. Well, first of all, as I said, I am a parent of 3. I have one in elementary, one in middle school, and one in high school. And so I just want to let you know, everyone, I understand, we're not just in the district office. We're experiencing it as parents as well as educators. And so I just wanted to first start out by thanking and acknowledging everybody. It's been challenging for everyone, and I want to thank everyone for doing the very best that you could do with your students in the circumstances. And, in addition to what Phil said, I just really want everybody to know that as educators, we want to be back in school with your children. That we understand the value of the one-on-one instruction. We really know that relationships are the heart and the key to learning and for your students to be successful. And so right now, all of the teachers are missing your students. We want everyone to go back in as normal or as in a traditional way as possible.
Thank you, Melissa. Amy, how about you? Would you like to share a few comments?
Absolutely. And I'm still perfecting the art of unmute on my phone. So yes, hats off to the families and the staff for what we've been through in the weekend turnaround from normal school to virtual school. I'm fortunate to have a grown child who's 26, and I just think thank goodness every day that this didn't exist when I was a working mom and raising a child and trying to do school. So that importance of that normal schedule. So in my role in the district, I oversee special education, gifted and talented, and health services, and never more important than those three things kind of coming together right now of our kids with special needs, both on that high end of achievement and talents, as well as on the kids who need special assistance or extra assistance, and then just the health and well-being of all of our students and our staff and our families in our community. So to me, the pandemic and this world of COVID that we're all living in and trying to figure out makes us all just be stronger if we band together. And that piece of working together, like Phil mentioned, with public health and with the state and with what we're doing instructionally and educationally, to me, is so important. And I appreciate all of the input that has come in because people have taken that tremendous care to really, think about what's best for my kid, the grade level, the school, and our community. So it's been a privilege. And as I've traveled the country in the last 2 days, like literally got to Wisconsin or to my dad's house like 10 minutes ago, it's been the whirlwind of, can I give him a hug? Can I not? Should I have a mask on? Should I not? And those decisions that we're making every day get real and more real as we look at returning to school.
Thank you for that. As I think about it, I'd like to take everybody back to the first day of March. I think it was either March 1st or 2nd. And the Public Health Department joined one of our leadership meetings and provided us some guidance, some insight. And we thought it was just the typical preparation for what was happening in the country at the time, which is everybody was pulling together their pandemic plan. So we felt like we were in a good spot. We had a pandemic plan. We had, been watching the news and knew we needed to be prepared for this. But then by March 6th, that same week, we had our first case in Eagle County. So it really came upon us quick. By March 13th, we were having a special emergency meeting with the Board of Education to suspend school. At that time, it was just for a short period of time. But then, of course, we all know what happened. It was continually delayed, and we ended up, finishing the school year in a remote fashion. So we are very grateful and appreciative of everyone's patience, the grace in which the community responded to this situation and helped with us. And we look forward to that type of ongoing partnership. Since that time, we've been working daily and tirelessly with the various members of public health and the health system and the Emergency Operations Command, just to see when we could reopen and what our next steps were going to be. And, that information has changed on a very regular basis, so it has been a challenge for us to keep up with the changing information. But we are now in committee work with public health on putting together some of the guidelines for getting back to school. And the 5 commitments of containment are probably going to be the key answer to a lot of what we're going to be doing as a school district. And as we look at reopening and having in-person instruction, how we can kind of keep our schools safe places to be. Melissa, would you want to maybe talk a little bit about the 5 commitments of containment and what might be most different for parents as they think about the well-being of their children when they send them back to school?
Well, and I think probably the biggest change from what we're used to thinking about, we before would always want our kids to get to school as much as possible. But one of the big things about those 5 commitments of containing coronavirus is for anyone symptomatic not to come to school or to work. And so it's really going to be a huge responsibility on the part of the parents to be monitoring your students and making sure any sort of symptoms that they may be exhibiting, that you do not send them to school. And I know, like I said, it's the opposite of what we've always said. I act as the truancy officer for the district, so it's kind of an odd thing for me to say, don't send your kids. Or if they do get sick, that they need to stay out of the school until they're completely, or anyone in your home is symptom free. And so I think one of the big aspects of that is making sure, by not bringing the virus into the school, that our commitment is to keep everyone else safe and healthy. And that is for our staff, that is for our students, that is for if you have someone that's tested positive in your family or is symptomatic and no one's been tested yet, we just don't know. Because keeping the virus out of the school, or mitigating it as soon as possible, a lot of deep cleaning on a daily basis at the school level is going to keep everyone healthy and safe. And so that, looking at social distancing is one of the commitments. And so we're doing everything that we can do to try and restructure the physical environment in the school to be able to give them as much space as possible between students and between staff. So the things that we're going to see in school will look a little bit different, and we'll talk about that, how we're going to do cohorts and that kind of thing probably in a few minutes here. But most important, make sure that we are all checking our own health, the health of our children, and not letting anyone in the school if they're symptomatic. And we've also, I think Phil said, purchased thermometers, and we will be doing health screenings on students as they come into school. But the biggest thing is, don't put them on the bus or don't send them to school, because otherwise, if we get too many cases, that's what's going to put us into the model that people are not necessarily going for at this point.
No, and sorry. The other piece I think to that, Melissa, is just, it's the same thing for staff as well, of if we're not feeling well, that importance of you got to stay home. And in the past, I think people tried to tough it out, tried to get back to work or back to school as quick as possible. And really the guidance that we're looking at now really talks about that frame of 14 days, 15 days of post symptoms. So really holding true to that. We're going to have people that are going to have to be out more than they've probably ever had to be out. So really working on that really conscientious taking care of each other, taking care of ourselves, and adhering to that, and not trying to say, I'm going to be tough and really, force it or return early and put other people at risk. And just the eliminating the shame that I think some people still attribute to, COVID. There's nothing that anybody can do to be immune. We're all in this together. It's not a stigma. Should you get sick or be sick or have a family member that's sick, it's just that importance of containing it, so that we're not putting our health system over the capacity of care.
Well, and Amy, can I add to that? And working in conjunction with public health, we are looking at spaces, designing spaces in the school where if a child is symptomatic or a staff is symptomatic, where we can put them until parents can pick them up, and it'll be a contained space so that the disease, whether we know they have it or not, would not be able to spread.
Phil, anything you might like to add to that? I think that I think that Melissa and Amy's covered it pretty well, but it really strikes me as to how important it's going to be for really unparalleled cooperation between schools and parents. Just really that need to make sure that we're keeping our sick children home, to protect the overall school environment, and to also make sure that they get the care they need. So I think that is going to be a big difference, and it's going to be a nice opportunity for closer collaboration.
And I think the one piece I would add is just to acknowledge that the real linchpin in this whole plan of coming back 5 days a week is making sure that staff stay healthy. And we do have about 10% of the staff. We employ about 1,000 people, and there's about 10% of them that fall into the category of at risk or high risk for contraction of COVID. And it doesn't mean that they have all elected to not work in schools. I'm actually very impressed by the willingness of most of those individuals to continue coming to work in the light of the dangers that they face in doing so. But if kids were to come to school sick and they may not be symptomatic or they may not be displaying the signs that we would typically associate with the illness, but they are still contagious. And if the adults in the building catch it, they are likely to be much more symptomatic and be out of operation in terms of their ability to do their job and function at a high level. And we've struggled with getting substitutes in the district for years. To get guest teachers to come into schools that's a tough job, and we've always had a hard time doing that. So imagine that environment now, trying to convince somebody, hey, come into a school. We've got a few hundred kids here, and there's a pandemic, but no, it'll be great. Come in. So our ability to find substitutes right now is going to be really challenging. So we've got to do everything we can to keep our staff healthy, keep our staff safe. So if staff or students have any signs of illness or have been around anybody that's sick, you got to ask families to keep them home so that we can keep the schools as clean and safe as we possibly can.
Thank you for that. And I know Sandy Mutchler is our operation officer, and I'm not sure if she's on here or not, but I do know that our facilities folks are working to add and increase hand washing stations and hand sanitizing devices so that during the school day we can practice regular and frequent hand washing. Several questions asked, what's going to happen in the event of a positive case at school? And I know we're still working on those details with public health, and there will be a very specific protocol, but Phil, what's the thinking, right now? Are we going to be, if we have a positive case, is that school likely to close down for 24 hours for cleaning and then open back up? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Man, I was muted. I just had an amazing answer. That's all right. I'll try it again. The challenge with the positive cases, you don't get the positive test result immediately. So a student is symptomatic. They go to the room for treatment from the school nurse. It's an isolated room, and then the parents would come and pick them up. We would hope that they would be able to go to a doctor's office and get a test immediately. The quickest test turnaround is still taking a day to 2 or 3 days sometimes. So we're not going to know immediately whether or not a student is positive or not. But in the event that we do have an outbreak at a school where we see a case and it's a confirmed case, our ability to try to control cohorts of students and keep those cohorts smaller and more contained means that if we have to close down a facility, we would be able to close down the smallest piece possible and keep the rest of the school trying to function. So in other words, if you've got a class of 25 students and they're in a contained room and an adult moves from room to room, so let's say the English teacher and the reading teacher switch places, or the math teacher and the writing teacher switch places, the kids are staying in the same room. And we're able to maybe shut down just a classroom for a day or two to clean, or a grade level for a day or two to clean, instead of a whole school. So our goal, back to that goal, is to try to maintain the normal schedule for our youngest students as much as we can for as long as we can, and only close down in the event that we have an identified cohort and we have confirmed cases.
I have a question, comment, kind of wondering, listening to this. And so even with asymptomatic students, if teachers are going between rooms, but they've come in contact, they're technically could possibly be taking it and then transferring it at another time to another classroom. But then when you talk about closing off certain classrooms or certain grades or corridors, what about the ventilation systems that run through the schools? So there's a ventilation system that flows through the whole building. There's no way to like close those off or segregate them for certain wings or levels to prevent the continual spread from classroom A to B and C?
Correct.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, the ventilation systems have been evaluated by the facilities department, and they do have filters throughout. So those filters are checked annually. They're working on them over the summer. So they don't have anything in them that's like actively antibacterial, with the exception of the air filters. And those air filters can block out some of those particles as best they can.
But they're not one of the forms that would block 95% or more. And if they're changed annually, only once a year, correct?
Typically, yeah.
So one thing, sorry, this is Amy. One thing that we have been working on is increasing the fresh air flow, because that's known to be a good thing, or believed to be a good thing at this point in time. So definitely working with public health folks and the facilities folks on what that looks like. And then one other piece that's a little bit different this year from the traditional health room that everybody's familiar with, we have established a space at each of the buildings that will really be used to try to isolate anybody who is explaining symptomatic feelings. And really that goal of that isolation space will be to have the least amount of contact with other people and to have the expedient leaving of the facility as much as possible. So we'll work with families about, who is that contact list if your student's not feeling well at school, that can come pick up your kids. That'll be more important than ever to have kind of the working numbers and or the friend that can help out the family in that circumstance, because we know that there's a lot of families who work and live on opposite ends of town. So we're going to want to really look at those contact and that contact information to help kids out should they become ill at school.
And Amy, you've also, Heather, I'll ask you to hold your questions. If we start just taking random and kind of ad hoc questions, we're not likely to get through everybody's questions. So we do have questions more about the ventilation a little bit later. But Amy, you've also been involved in some of the public health planning and some of the other changes. Air ventilation is one of them, but also, talking about not having the sharing of instructional resources, changing up to where we're not having small group clusters for collaborative work, and other types of things that might help, again, with the droplet form of contamination. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know, like even in the preschool, they've removed all of the plush animals and things that are difficult to sanitize with our sanitation equipment.
Absolutely. So I've done walkthroughs with each of the schools and public health or county health, and we've really looked at some of those spaces and really trying to eliminate. Sometimes it's the comfy corner of, but things that can't be washed or disinfected, as well as what kind of shared materials do we have? Like in many classrooms, there's kind of the community materials, really having to look differently at school space that way. And we're also looking at hallways of traffic flow patterns and how to have the least intrusive interaction. And we don't want it to be so sterile that it's not a community of learners, without a doubt. So really trying to take a peek at that, looking at, lunchrooms for obviously reducing the number of kids, but also having good experiences for kids. So we've started with some talk of, should kids eat in their classrooms and really be that contained, or can we be more fluid about really being strategic about changing class rooms, class periods, and environments. Public health also, the guidance is outside is the best thing that we can do. And so really having kids have that outside time and maybe even more intentional outside time of classroom things. So that space in classrooms, our classrooms are beautiful, but they are not 6 foot of barrier space. So we're looking at all kinds of things. Are face coverings appropriate or are they not appropriate? And when are they appropriate? So those are going to be those decisions that we're working to continue to refine as we learn more. And I think the guidance has truly changed each week, if not even more frequently than that.
Well, in addition, Amy, I think it's important that we're looking at doing things more in cohorts so we can backtrack contact. I know somebody had a question about contact. So we know which students have been where in the building, who they've been with. And so to keep those in as tight of cohorts as possible is going to be the aim for next year. And then also just limiting those kinds of activities that they may normally do, just so we don't have we probably will not do field trips that require busing. Anytime that we can keep students as far apart as possible are some of the things that we're going to be looking at for next year. And it may be, we're not sure, again, how we're going to run sports. This summer, we are able to kind of open up some practices with social distancing. If kids want to get together to do a practice. But there's going to be certain things like basketballs or volleyballs or things that would be a common touch item that we're going to have to adapt and in practices. I'm not sure if we will actually have seasons for things this fall. It really depends on what happens with COVID, but in practices we would assure that everyone has their own piece. We even have one elementary school that's already ordered their kind of bags for every student so that they don't have we like to have collaborative common supplies in elementary school, but we're looking at assuring that every student only comes in contact with their own pencils and their own scissors, and just to kind of eliminate that extra step of having to disinfect all of those items continuously during the day as well.
So thank you for that, Melissa. I think as Melissa was a former principal in our district at Avon, and it's really going to, there are going to be a lot of these adjustments that we have to make that as we talk about them as adults, they seem challenging and maybe not all of that great or ideal. But it really will be the magic of the teacher engaging the student that makes it so that the kids, especially at the elementary level, they're just excited to be there and learning, and they're not really going to be noticing, we hope, some of the changes that we have to make. So I really think that just the skill and the experience of our teachers are going to make this a really positive learning experience for our students. We did have one parent comment, I would rather do remote learning if kids will have to wear a mask all day at school. And we had other folks say the opposite. Why wouldn't it be required that students and teachers all have face coverings? And we don't really know exactly yet where public health is going to come down on this. But Phil, would you start us off with maybe a little further discussion on just the idea of face coverings? I think that as we've warned them as a society, we know they're not all that comfortable. And of course, for younger kids, the fidget factor and there's just a lot of challenges there. How would you elaborate on that, Phil?
We know that face coverings reduce the transmission of microdroplets. And if we can reduce the transmission of microdroplets, then we can keep COVID from spreading in schools. So I think that the recommendation would be that we wear them as frequently as we can. Now, do we require them? Can we require them? There's a lot of reasons why they're hard to require. As you mentioned already, youngest kids, trying to wear a mask all day, they're going to mess with them. They're going to play with them with their hands. They're going to fidget with them, and that ruins the efficacy of them. As I just touched my face, because they're always touching their face and the germs are spreading. But I think another important part to consider for our staff is they are communicating constantly with students. And a lot of that communication is verbal, but a lot of it is not. A lot of that communication is in facial expressions. It's in facial, it's in how they're holding their mouth and their face and their eyes. And if you got a face shield on or you got a mask over your face, students can't always tell exactly what your tone is. So there's a ton of communication that happens behind the mask that gets lost. And one of the important elements for our staff when we considered, coming back to school is making sure that they have the ability to create the relationships with students. They want to connect. They want to make sure that the kids feel respected and that they feel included in the classroom. And that gets tough when your face is covered up and you can't communicate. So we're going to work closely with public health on this one. We're watching for guidance from the Colorado Department of Education and from the governor's office, as I stated before. It's unfortunate that the masks have become a political issue. And from the survey data that we collected last week, we could certainly see that there are people that are adamant on both sides of this issue. Some who say, as you mentioned, I won't bring my kid to school if he has to wear a mask, and some that say, I won't bring my kid to school unless everybody wears a mask all the time. So we're going to land somewhere in the middle. In the event that students need to be in closer proximity or in close contact for a period of time, masks would be required. For example, if we have kids riding buses. Kids riding buses, the only way that we can make that happen safely is to require the use of face masks. If we're able to do classes outside or in more spread out environments, maybe we don't need to. So I don't think you're going to see a hard and fast 100% rule about masks. We're certainly going to support students and staff who want to wear them all the time. We'll encourage people to do that. I think it's smart. I think it makes sense. But there will be times when it doesn't make sense, or times when it's not effective because kids are fidgeting with them because they're too young. I worked in a high school for most of my career, and trying to get kids to follow just a normal dress code was challenging enough, let alone trying to say you got to wear this thing over your face all day. So it's going to come with its own challenges at every level. But we're going to make a policy that we know that we can enforce. We're going to make a policy that we know promotes safety as much as possible, and try to reduce transmission as much as we can.
Well, and Phil, can I add, I'm not sure if everyone's aware, but we actually do have students in session over the summer. We have our preschools, some of our classrooms are extended and they got a grant to do some summer work. And we do have a variety of different masks that we're trying out as well. Some face shields and some masks that allow younger children or like children that are hearing impaired. They're transparent. They're a little bit more pricey and harder to get, but we are trying that. And children under the age of 3 by law cannot, or by statute cannot wear a mask. I think it's because of a choking hazard or something like that. So, with the social distancing, it's going pretty well so far. And then the teachers are trying out all those different sort of face coverings to make sure that everybody stays safe.
Yeah, and I would just add that I have been working with the county to look at what kinds of variety and how many masks we can have, because we certainly don't want anybody to be without a mask should they want one and should they need one. And like Melissa said, for some of our kids who have hearing loss and or deafness, the importance of lip reading and just some of those pieces that we're trying to put in place around their specific needs and what that can look like, because just the loneliness factor of what that can be. But we also know that some of our kids really struggle with personal space. So we have to help them learn kind of new business for how we do business. People are physical, and as they learn and grow into their bodies, just how do we do this in a new way that will keep everyone as healthy as we can.
Thanks, Amy. We appreciate that. Phil, one of the many questions that we get is really just this idea of social distancing and some of the practices that have been put in play, they're not designed to necessarily be foolproof and stop all transmission. It's really about mitigating the transmission to a level that is manageable for our healthcare providers. So along with the increased testing, the faster testing, we can kind of identify those with symptoms fast, remove them from the general population so that everybody doesn't have to be in isolation. But that's still very concerning for us, and it's very concerning for parents. We had a lot of teachers comment on our question form and ask about teacher health and what we're going to be doing for teacher health. And you've already mentioned that that is kind of the linchpin. If we have a lot of teachers get ill, then we're going to have a hard time keeping our doors open for that purpose alone. Can you provide a little bit more information about what we might do there in terms of the thermometers, the self-checks that we may ask staff members to do, those types of things?
Yeah, you bet. So yeah, health of staff is key for us staying in session. And we just finished actually the negotiations process with the teachers union in recent weeks. And one of the things that we agreed to is that if there are any increases in cost to health insurance premiums this year, that the school district will take on 100% of those costs. So none of those costs are going to be pushed on to teachers. I think there's an increased concern over their own health and safety. And as an organization, we need to continually demonstrate how valuable they are as assets to our students and to our organization. So we're going to pick up that cost. To keep them safe in schools, we're going to have medical grade face masks available. Many folks have their own, the style that they prefer or the color that they like or that helps them breathe or makes it easy to talk. So if they have one that they prefer, they're welcome to do that. But we do intend to have medical grade masks on hand. We're working with public health right now to price those out. We have heard that they're hard to get, and especially because medical personnel need them, and we understand that and appreciate that. But we also recognize that teachers are really essential workers in keeping our economy working and keeping our society working as normal as possible. So we need to give them as high quality masks as we can possibly afford and as many as we can get. We also are working on procuring the touchless infrared handheld thermometers. And we will be using those in schools, in classrooms, and that way they can self-check their temperature periodically. They can also check kids who might be feeling ill in class, and we can keep constant checks on temperature as an indicator of general wellness. We've also had some latitude in our leave policy to make sure that teachers recognize that if they do need to take time to quarantine, that they should be able to do that without feeling like they're going to exhaust their entire accrued leave if they've been with us for a long time. This is a pandemic that we're all experiencing. And when somebody self-quarantines, they really do it for the health of their peers and for their students and their colleagues. So we should honor their sacrifice in staying home for everybody else's safety and make some adjustments to our leave policy that is mindful of that.
Thanks, Phil. Amy, I see your microphone went off.
I did. I mean, the whole piece on the wellness of teachers can't be understated. And so those teachers, obviously, we don't probe and ask for those details. You know, HIPAA protects everyone's healthcare records. And so we want our staff to make sure that they let us know if they have concerns regarding their health and or their return to work. But I think the important piece going forward will be for students and staff that everybody recognize that we need to respect people's privacy and not need to, like, there's not going to be the sharing of public information on illness. Obviously, we're going to report trends. We're going to share when something's going on that concerns a school. We're going to increase those disinfection practices and high touch areas. Like, I think it's kind of the time of the cleanest restrooms and the cleanest public spaces that we've ever seen. And it's really wonderful in some ways. Also just increasing the amount of hand sanitizer that's present, because we're really working on those practices of whenever a child or an adult leaves one environment to go to the next, making sure that we are disinfecting so that any germs that you did pick up along the way get stopped as much as possible. And the district purchased kind of those disinfection foggers that will be really looking at kind of that use of common areas, the use of classroom spaces to be disinfected more regularly. And that'll entail staff helping out in ways that, you know, sometimes it was left for the custodian to do that. But I think every staff member will have an aspect of that practice on improving the cleanliness, the disinfection levels of things. And it made me go back to thinking what we were talking about earlier when we were talking about, will we require masks? The one employee group that really we want to have at the most like covered lens is our health assistants and our nurses. You know, those are the folks that are going to be that front line of tending to both our injured kids, our well kids that come to the office for other things, as well as COVID response. So those folks will really have kind of that increased like gloves, masks, face masks, because we want to ensure that their safety through this process or through this next upcoming year is really taken care of.
You know, we really are learning, I think, as we go, that the droplet transmission is the most common way that the virus is transmitted. So we're going to be working to disinfect and to maintain social distance and to minimize that kind of droplet transmission to the best of our ability. Melissa, can you talk a little bit about you know, how that might look in the classroom?
Well, yeah,
especially at the elementary level.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we're really looking at, I think if you've been in your young child's classroom, you see we have a lot of tables. So it's really looking at how do we stretch those out. So if there's, you know, a 6-foot table, there's one child at each end versus normally we would have 4 to 6 children around that table. We have looked at shifting around furniture in the district to give more opportunities for individual spaces and desks than we've had in the past. It goes quite a bit against what we've been doing. We've done very, very collaborative, you know, group-centered teaching and discussion, you know, and so we're going to have to just add social distance in between that to assure that we're not exposing kids to others too closely for that droplet factor. But we are doing that, and we have had our custodial and maintenance staff go around and measure all of our buildings, you know, to figure out what would give us a good footprint if we did have to maintain at least that 6-foot social distance of like 36 square feet per student. And, you know, and that's where the idea for that hybrid model came, because, you know, generally our classrooms are between 18 and 26 kids. You know, if the health department's going to say that we're going to have 25, or the state or whoever says we're going to go back in classrooms of 25, you know, that does not leave room in all of our classrooms for that social distancing. And that's where that hybrid model was kind of derived. And, you know, if we had half the amount of kids in those classrooms at any given point, it would give us the opportunity for more space, not to have that droplet contagion, and then also give us, you know, the opportunity one day a week to do even a deeper cleaning. Like, we are going to do deep cleaning and sanitizing every day, you know, but that lets us get even to that deeper level to make sure that everybody stays safe. So, you know, I just wanted everyone to know that the hybrid model, the AB, was not intended, you know, just to kind of keep going with the idea that we're going with right now, but it really is a way that we could, as a district, help ensure more of that social distancing and making sure that students are not in such quite tight places to help for that contagion. And if that were to happen, we would have students in those cohorts it would be the same 10 students that would be together throughout the course until we get a vaccine. And then that would help us with that contagion tracking too, should anyone get sick.
So the governor just today, I think, announced that or suggested that our colleges go back to a 50% classroom capacity. And this is another one of those examples of suggestions that changes almost daily. But that's really the idea behind the hybrid model, is that if we are directed to go back to a half capacity so that we can achieve the social distancing, then how do we do that to ensure that students still get good quality in-classroom instruction as much as possible? The hybrid model was quite a big topic in the questions that we received and the comments that we received. It was a well-discussed subject of the survey results. We had one person say it's unrealistic to task our teachers with both platforms, an in-classroom teaching and an online teaching platform. And Phil, last night you mentioned a bit about that at the board meeting. It's really not the same as having two different platforms. I wonder if you and Melissa and Amy can just touch a little bit about what instruction looks like in a hybrid model.
Sure, Dan, happy to talk about that. And it was one of the elements from the survey that teachers acknowledged that they want some more training in. And it's really the essence of a hybrid classroom is understanding the flipped model of instruction. A flipped classroom, and that's a term that we've heard for many years, requires that when students are in the classroom, that they spend most of their time engaged in active learning. So that means that they will be communicating with the teacher, communicating with their peers. They'll be working with project materials that can only be done at school. They'll be receiving the feedback necessary from teachers to improve their performance. And then when the time is at home, when they're not in front of the teacher and in front of their peers, they will be given direct tasks with clear instructions and clear outcomes that they need to work on when they're at home. So instead of just doing 100% remote learning with very little synchronous instruction, as we did in the past 2 months of the school year, they will be sent home with specific tasks to get done that relate to the work they just did the day before. So it takes away that onus of the student to really understand completely what their whole schedule looks like, plan out for an entire week, and really have that intrinsic motivation to constantly manage their own schedule and learn all the content. It prioritizes the time that kids are in front of teachers for active, engaged learning, and then it sets very clear outcomes, very clear learning targets, and descriptions of tasks that kids can work on when they're at home. And then the next day the student comes to school, those projects are reviewed, feedback is given, and the cycle continues. So it's a blend. I mean, it's a hybrid, right? It's a blend of what happens in school and what can happen at home, but it provides the structure that parents and students were asking for when students are at home, but it also embraces and values that time that they're in school for active and engaged learning.
Well, and I think what's important about that is we're going to use that model whether we're 5 days, whether we're hybrid. And so how we're teaching the teachers to do it is thinking of it that way, of that synchronous and that asynchronous. So the training this fall for our teachers is going to be really based around how do you plan for that kind of instruction. And an example would be, the asynchronous piece, like maybe students would read a chapter or they would watch a video or something to build background knowledge before that discussion, or, the teacher would maybe tape a lecture and students could watch that prior or when other students are working with the teacher to get that skill set before everybody has that in-depth discussion where you're learning from the teacher and from the other students. But if we set up the entire year that way, then if for some reason we do a hybrid or we do go to a remote model, the way the instruction is happening stays the same. So if you were remote, you would have your synchronous days and times that you would do, and you would have your asynchronous that would be assigned either prior or after you had that synchronous time with the teacher. So it's a new way of thinking for many of our teachers, but we believe that that training is going to help them make transitions between different sorts of environments, 5-day hybrid or remote, whatever the health department and the circumstances dictate.
I'm just going to say I laugh because every time we say synchronous and asynchronous, I get confused about which one means which thing. But that live time or that anytime you want to. But I think that's the big difference between what some families are looking for in terms of the flexibility of not having to be at any given time. And that would be very different. That would be our more model of our World Academy classes, where folks can tune in and do education at their convenience or at their time frame. And World Academy would offer that full-time teaching and that full-time flexibility of doing school or doing education at the time that's flexible, and leave out that component of coming to school as well. So it's just another option that exists kind of in the menu of services that we have, and thinking about all of our kids and what each individual kid needs to learn best. So World Academy is different than that hybrid plan where the teacher is doing both of those things, where the World Academy piece would be that full-time instructional model designed to be always delivered in that manner. And so there are kids that have had great success with World Academy prior to COVID jumping into our world. And I think we'll have probably more families who want to explore that as an option as we go ahead.
Well, and just Amy, for people that don't know, so World Academy is part of our school district. It is our district online school. For anyone that may not know that we do have an online school already existing in Eagle County.
Yeah, and I could make a plug for it because both of my daughters attended some classes through World Academy. They had some specific interest in and some specific scheduling challenges, and it did take them a little bit of time at the beginning to learn to be so self-directed and motivated to not get behind, but they really did well with it. I think that's the World Academy is a good service for the students that really thrive in that type of environment. Many of the other questions and comments about remote learning were related to the need for some type of parent training and some type of streamlining of the various technological gateways that we use. And if we go into some type of hybrid method, will there be some type of orientation or basic introduction for parents? And is that something that can happen during the back to school period and the kind of meet your teacher, get your schedule type of period?
Dan, I'll take that one. We talked a lot tonight about trying to get back to school 5 days a week and get as normal as we can for as long as we can. And that phrase, as long as we can, means that there might be some point in the school year when we have some COVID cases in a school and we have to close that school down. So we need to take time at the beginning of the year when we know we're going to have kids in seats and time with students and then with their families to explain, here are the different models that we may be implementing this school year. When we made the shift back in the middle of March, as Amy mentioned, within 72 hours, we shut down school and we started remote learning. Teachers made a miraculous transition in that 72 hours to teaching remotely. They've been training through the Connect to Learn program on how to utilize and leverage internet resources. They've been developing their course structures through Schoology. So they were fairly well prepared to make that shift. However, a rapid shift from remote teaching doesn't necessarily mean a rapid shift to remote learning. So our kids were thrown into this situation where they had to figure out how to manage that learning all on their own. Parents were there trying to sort out dozens of different platforms, different teacher notes, teacher structures, lesson plan structures. It was frustrating. It was challenging for a lot of people. So we need to take the beginning of the school year, and it's going to be imperative that in the first few weeks that we explain to students, here's how we're doing it now, but here's how it might be in 2 or 3 months. Here's what a hybrid model might look like. Here's what we'll be doing at school, and then here's what you would be doing at home. And in the event that we have to completely shut down, we're still going to try to provide that synchronous learning time. We're going to try to have kids and teachers in front of each other at the same time, at given times during the day, when they can connect in a classroom, kind of like we're doing right now. And the teacher can model and demonstrate and talk and explain, and then kids can contribute and collaborate through their computers, all in a synchronous manner. So the point to your question is we have to take that time in August to explain, here are the different models, here are the different tools that we'll be using in those models, and we need to bring parents in to learn those systems. We need to have online tutorials available for parents to understand, here's how you log in, here's where you find all your credentials, here's the template that we'll be using to make lesson plans more consistent. So if you're working with kids, as Melissa is, 3 kids, 3 different grades, different levels, elementary, middle, high school, until as a system, we provide more continuity to bring that process into a manageable place for families. We haven't done our job yet. So expect that kind of training in August. Teachers understand that, principals understand that. We're developing that professional learning for parents to match what their kids will be doing in school, and taking the time to work with kids to get them to understand what that transition will look like. So it doesn't feel like we just threw them into the deep end without enough lessons to be competent swimmers in the cyber world.
Well, and Phil, I think it's also important that parents know that we are going to go to one-on-one devices for every student in the district. So prior, we had Connect to Learn, where we were trying to get one-on-one devices for grades 5 to 12. But with our COVID relief funds, that is one of our priorities, is to assuring that every student has the device that's set up for them that would be easily flipped to the home environment, where they have their home screen that's ready to go. So as a parent, you're not going to have to search all over, go to different websites. It's all going to be through our Schoology platform, and then the links for everything that you need will be in there. So we will be working with all the teachers to assure that they're using Schoology and it's set up in a way that's easily navigated in the classroom environment. And then if we do have to make the jump to a remote environment for some reason, the kids will already know how to do it, and they will have practiced it in the class. And we will work with parents at the beginning of the school year. I know that you're used to kind of going into your back to school night or parent night to learn about how things work in your child's classroom, and then we will, since we've learned so much about these remote environments, we will be doing this in remote environments as well for the families that need to do it asynchronously, or the ones that would like to follow along but not come into the school to do it.
Well, I hope that is reassuring. That all sounds very helpful to me. I know a lot of parents expressed frustration over the technology so this level of streamlining, I think, is going to be appreciated. We had a lot of questions about the hybrid model, but the elephant in the room around the hybrid model is what are parents supposed to do with the children on their days off? We had parents ask, will the district be providing childcare for those days off if we have to go to an A/B schedule? We also had parents point out that if we don't have some type of structured childcare through the district, then parents are likely to take their children to work and or arrange their own kind of day off groups of kids. And the concern there is that instead of kind of containing the opportunity for transmission, it actually expands it. And I don't know that we have answers for those questions, but I did want to toss it out there and out of respect of the number of people that ask about childcare. It really seems to be the biggest challenge is how are we going to take care of our kids on those days off?
Yeah, I have a lot of sympathy for that question. Having kids of my own in different levels of school, leaving them home to do the work while I try to go to meetings or hosting meetings at home while they're running around acting crazy. It makes it hard for me to do my work, makes it hard for me to supervise them doing their schooling. So, you know, as Melissa mentioned earlier, it's hard, and there's no easy answer to that. I think that the best thing that we can assure our families is that we are trying to get back, especially with elementary and middle school, 5 days a week. So we're going to do that as long as we can, because we understand that in order for parents to make sure that they can provide a secure, financially stable situation for their families, that they've got to be able to go to work. And we want to be in school. We want to be there with kids. Teachers want to be there with kids. That's what we do. That's what we train for. That's the work that we love. So we're trying to get back to that as quickly as we can. In the event that we do transition to a hybrid model, it's our intent to reach out to some of our nonprofit partners that have been huge assets for us in the past. And I could start down the list, but every time I do, I forget one or two, and then I get in trouble. But I'm sure you can think of all of the different non-partners that help us with power hours after school, or help us with science camps in the summer, or ski training in the winter. I mean, the organizations that we have in this community are really impressive at their ability to come to support kids when kids need it and when families need it. So if we're able to provide hybrid learning for 2 or 3 days a week in school, they might be able to provide some kind of an extended camp activity, or some kind of a power hours or different learning environment for kids on those off days. But that would be a program that we would work out with those nonprofit partners in the event that we end up in that situation.
Thank you, Phil. We all have in our survey, 48% of our staff have children. So we understand the challenge of childcare and how difficult it may be to address this moving forward. I just don't know, other than just trying to keep our schools open and working with our partners, that we have a more finite answer at this point, but it is one that we continue to work on with a variety of partners. I'll move on to another question that came up from more than one person. And it's really this desire to get back to what they call a real normal and not a new normal. And, really what they're talking about that is, a situation where there's not this kind of undercurrent of fear about the virus, and trying to really safeguard kids from thinking that people and things can make you sick. And gosh, I just don't know when the real normal comes back. But Phil or Amy, Melissa, you guys want to take on that and just talk a little bit about the importance of not emphasizing the safety issue of the virus, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dan, I'd like to talk for a minute about one of the programs that many of our teachers are in this summer. It's a program called Safe and Resilient Schools. And that word resilient is really important. I think we've got to be mindful that there may not be a back to the traditional normal for some time. So we've got to operate with the cards that we're given, and we've got to have a positive attitude about it. We've got to have engaging activities for kids. We can't dwell in fear. If we do so, we create additional trauma for kids and make it even harder for them to be successful in school. So as the adults in the room, we have to model stability. We have to model predictability in the schedules that we try to provide for them. The safe and resilient training, I think, is a key step in that. and I might be stealing somebody's thunder later on when we talk about social emotional learning, but it's important for us to understand that this is a global pandemic. It's a national challenge for us. It's a local challenge for us, and it's a family challenge for every single one of us. So it's being felt at many levels. But we always hear that all politics are local. Well, in this case, all these traumas are very personal, and every family is managing them in their own way. And if we don't acknowledge that, if we don't recognize that families are feeling the stress, feeling the anxiety, worried about their finances, worried about how they're going to manage somebody who gets really sick, then we're really not doing our part in educating. We got to educate kids. We got to educate staff. And I got to give hats off to our staff. I don't know how many we've had completed. I think I heard over 100 have already completed the safe and resilient training. But we have over half of our teachers are doing that this summer in their own time, because they want to be prepared for when kids come back into the school to help them process this national trauma, this local trauma, the family trauma, so that they can grow from it, they can learn from it, but not dwell in it. So to your point, I wish we could turn back the clock. I wish I could turn back the clock to the end of February, when my concerns were very different than they are right now. When the dress code concern was our kids wearing hats in school. I would love to have that problem right now. As Chris Lindley mentioned at a previous meeting, I haven't talked about kids vaping for weeks. I didn't hold an expulsion hearing for 10 weeks. So our old problems are, we'd love to have those again, but we don't. So we've got new challenges. We'll fight those challenges. We'll overcome them, but we can't ignore that they happened. And school will be a place where we can process that, because we've all gone through them together.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off if I started to. I think the importance of coming together on behalf of our kids is exactly kind of what you're talking about, Phil. We don't want people to be so strongly pro or against, or for or against. COVID is definitely new, and we're exploring what does it mean, and it's taking on kind of so many new forms every day. And our families and our community and the country is talking about so many things with such political charge that really we want our kids to be able to come together and not be unnecessarily fearful, but also not unnecessarily dismissive. And we have practices that we can improve and get better at. To think that we're like, the summer's homework, how do you wash your hands thoroughly? Like, everybody needs to know that. And it sounds so funny to think, haven't we known that forever? But no, we probably haven't. But those things of cautions and precautions that we can really be responsible for as we aim to come back to school out of everybody's safety and protection. And our kids are resilient. I'm so glad to see the teachers kind of taking part in that training, because we know there's a trauma that comes with just the world being turned upside down on kids and adults. Pretty much over a weekend, things turned upside down in their worlds. And so how do we return in a new and better way as we head into 2021?
Well, and I think, that goes back to the importance on the parents of you modeling those best health practices, those best social distancing practices, because you're their first teachers, and they are going to follow at school whatever you're doing at home and in your social circles. So it is a community health issue, and it's the importance for all of us. And it's important for all of us to be empathetic and sympathetic, because we do not know exactly the situation that all of our staff or our students have been in during this quarantine period. And so I think, whatever we can do, we are planning to go back and do a lot of, I would say, grounding with our students, and some activities that will help us gauge where they are and their readiness to learn and re-engage in whatever our new normal environment is. And so we will be working with staff to get them grounded and ready to do everything they can do socially, emotionally for your children, and working with the children when they get back to school, because it's not something that we can just jump in and pretend like it never happened. And also the preparation for any, in a day's notice or a couple days notice, if we have to change what they've just learned is their new schedule. We need to teach the adaptability and that resiliency, and assure that everything's going to be okay for everybody.
Thank you for that. Moving on to another question. There have been some systems in the country, but also in international schools that have developed somewhat of a quasi-contract with families, that is essentially a healthcare check, a promise to pre-screen their kids before they go to school. And the questions really were, is that something that we're considering? So I think we do need some type of general cooperation for parents, but I'm not sure about the contract. I don't know, Amy, if you or Melissa or Philly, the one wants to jump in on that.
I would absolutely. So when I hear contract, I just get all kind of creeped out in terms of like the legalness of it. We definitely want to create a checklist of like, what is everybody doing to ensure we're doing the right things for our kids? So Phil and I have been working with the other schools in the community. We've been working with public health on really aligning kind of what are the look-fors, what are the things that parents should know and be doing or on the home front, and then what are the things that we on the forefront of school need to be looking for and doing. So I would say no on the contract, but yes on the checklist, the important pieces. And I think we can teach our kids all those important pieces as well. And we're definitely investigating all kinds of things, like Melissa talked about earlier, the experimentation with which masks work going on right now with kids and adults in preschool, and trying to figure out from a comfort level, but also from a health level, what makes sense. We're also, the shields, the guards, the gloves, like all those pieces of containing as much as we can to stay as healthy as we can. And so, I don't think we can say enough that this year is going to be focused on, good health. And if you're not healthy, staying home, so that the school environment can stay as healthy as possible, because we have to remember that the school environment gets big real fast. From the home to the school, you're taking that family and multiplying it by, we range in size from 200 to almost 1,000 kids. So really being smart about what we do that way without the language of contract in my mind. But really, what are the expectations we're going to have about washing your hands and about how we travel in the hallways? Those things will have to be taught to our kids and the adults. And I really would hope and expect that we'll have everybody's cooperation in that learning process this year.
Yeah, and there will be probably some instances where we will have to have some restrictions. In order for us to bring students on the bus, we would have to run multiple routes in order to socially distance all the students on the bus. So, we may say you have to have a face covering if you ride the bus, but, we would have some available if kids forgot them, to make sure that they were able to do that. But, there's only so many resources available, and we would have to, in some cases, maybe require them, but we would provide what would be required so that nobody would be left at the bus stop.
Thanks for that. I'll take just a minute to give us an update. We're at the 6:20 mark, and so we have about 40 minutes left in our time slot. We are getting towards the end of the questions. So I see that our attendance is ebbing and flowing, but it's dropping off a little bit. I just would ask to everybody to bear with us. We're getting really close. I do think that we are a wonderful community that can count on one another. There's a great deal of collective trust and a collaborative spirit. I would, I just imagine us all working together and understanding that we're all working from a best intentions perspective to start with. We do have one more kind of sensitive question, and that's kind of around this issue of trust, and it probably comes from an educator that has a high-risk person at home, and they're asking, how will we know if parents are being honest about the health of their children? And Phil, maybe you can talk a little. So, do we have a double check? How will we know?
Dan, I'm gonna come back to that question, but I'd like to expand on something that we were just talking about. Melissa and Amy were commenting on, in terms of the 5 commitments. We talked about those earlier, and one of those big commitments is stay home if you're sick. We can't say this enough, and the other piece of this to recognize is that you may not know if you're sick because you have COVID, or because you have the flu, or because you have allergies. But understand that in our planning for this school year, we are mindful that people will be staying home, students may be staying home, staff may be staying home at a higher rate than we normally see. And we're trying to accommodate lesson planning and assignments and online organization to facilitate continuity of learning in the event that students need to stay home because they're sick for whatever reason. And in the event that a family is faced with the decision of, do I send my student to school who has demonstrated some symptoms this morning, and do I call into work, or do I risk it and send them to school and think that they're going to be okay? We've got to recognize that there's a risk and there's a consequence. And this is a conversation I have with my 12 and my 16-year-old all the time. There are risks and there are consequences. And if you want to take the risk, you have to accept the consequence. And the risk of sending somebody to school who may be symptomatic and then infecting an entire class or a grade level, the consequence might be that entire school shuts down. So you thought you might be inconvenienced by one day of staying home with your child who's sick, or for 5 days or 10 days of staying home if they need to self-quarantine. And if you don't do that, the consequence might be that entire school gets shut down because of a massive outbreak, and they don't come back for 2 or 3 months like we just did in the spring. So as we're weighing our choices and thinking, will people do this or will they not? I have to think that most people understand that risk consequence balance is important, and that most people will recognize that they don't want to risk because they don't want that consequence. And will everybody do it? Maybe not. But will they understand that school can shut down? I would look at March 13th, 2020 and say, yes, it can shut down, and it can shut down for a long time. So please be responsible for your own kids, for your own family, but recognize that there's also a responsibility for the rest of the school community. And I totally forgot your question. So you're gonna have to remind me of where you were.
It's really just, do we have, are we planning on a protocol to kind of double check kids in case they do come to school, sick?
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's probably, we've addressed this to some degree with the availability of thermometers and those types of things. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about that and see if you've got an answer for that. I think that most people are going to cooperate, so I don't think it's going to be an issue, but it was asked.
That's a question that we're focused on right now in collaboration with public health. And I've seen Heath Harmon on the meeting. Becky Larson has been a great partner for us. Mandy Ivanoff. So all employees of public health have a close relationship with us in our planning. And we've talked about temperature taking how effective and useful that can be, but also that kids can be carriers and very frequently are asymptomatic. So taking temperatures may not be an effective tool for us to identify kids who are sick. Nevertheless, if we can purchase a significant supply of those infrared thermometers and distribute those to classrooms and teachers and administrators across the district, it's just one more tool. It's just one more way that we can check and see if somebody has a fever and then move them to an isolation room until they can get picked up and checked out. So as to whether or not we will have a regular temperature taking regimen or a health check before walking into a building, that's something that we continue to work with public health to define. But will we have some thermometers available? You bet.
Thanks for that, Phil. Going through the questions again here, we're coming back to the hybrid model. We had a lot of parents say it's not a good choice, mainly because if they're uncomfortable sending their kid to school for 5 days, they're also uncomfortable sending them to school for just 2 days. And they suggest that there really are just two options. One is a really excellent in-school learning all the time, and the other is really excellent in-home learning all the time. And I just wanted to kind of get a feeling for that. I mean, I do think that we have to be prepared for an outbreak should it be necessary. Is World Academy, though, our excellent in-home learning program?
And I think that there are multiple answers to that question. World Academy is a great program. They utilize software called Edgenuity. Anybody can look up Edgenuity and see the kind of product that they offer. It is comprehensive, it is engaging, but it does require a student to be very self-motivated. It does require that intrinsic desire and discipline to sit down at a set schedule for a certain number of hours a day and do that work individually. There are teachers who can support, teachers who can offer some answers to questions, but it's a challenging way for a lot of students to learn. What we have learned in the last 2 months and what the data has shown us over and over again is that in-person instruction from a trained, qualified, licensed teacher is the most effective thing that we can do to improve achievement and academic growth for students. So that's what we want. We want students with their teachers as frequently as we can possibly make that happen, because we know that that's how we provide them the best service that we can do. When kids get older, into middle school or high school, if we end up in a hybrid model, the offerings might be more limited. They may not have as much opportunity to take such a great variety of courses in a traditional classroom setting. But then you can leverage World Academy and Edgenuity to give them opportunities to take those, what we would call in the schedule, a singleton, or a class that you can only offer at one slot in the schedule. For an example, like an advanced placement physics 2 is a class that's not going to have high demand, but your kids who are in that class will probably have conflicts with a dual enrollment college English class or a band class or other classes that make their scheduling challenging. So at that point, you can leverage World Academy and that independent learning style, and a student could still try to take an advanced placement physics class through Edgenuity and World Academy instead of trying to do it in person, and still go to that in-person teacher if they need to get support and coaching. So it can be utilized in a lot of different ways. And for somebody who really needs to stay home and they're very scared about coming to school and they've got that intrinsic discipline and motivation to learn, it's an excellent tool.
Well, and can I add, Phil, World Academy would be more for someone that just wants to do 100% online learning, would be like your homeschool kind of person generally, where I wouldn't want people to think that they would need to do World Academy if they're worried their kid's going to be out for like 2 weeks or something like that. Right. And so that's why we're training all the teachers to do the Schoology platform, and that flipped classroom model, because we know students are going to be in and out, in and out, in and out, and we don't know who's going to be out, when they're going to be out. And so that's why all the classroom materials will be in Schoology. So you don't have to worry about your student missing 2 weeks of instruction. Like, yeah, they'll have a few days where if they get COVID, they're going to feel really crummy and they probably won't be able to do any work. But you will have that same access the way that you did in the remote environment. And we're even talking about the possibility of being able to broadcast, the teacher can just do something simple like a Hangout or something like that for some of the lessons, or just record theirs on their Chromebook, so that if students are missing a lecture or something like that because they're ill, we're going to do everything that we can do to make all of the content from the classroom accessible in the classroom and out of the classroom.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction. We certainly wouldn't want to create the impression that World Academy is just for those temporary and short-term absences. It's kind of exciting to me to think about, really having everything online, even if you're in school. If you happen to catch a cold or flu and you're out, instead of having work sent home with you, it's already available online and you just have access to it. Am I kind of characterizing that right?
Yeah, Dan,
Melissa?
very much so. I think that, having worked in high schools for so long, we often had students who needed to excuse themselves for sports or activities or speech and debate tournaments or plays. And my coaching to the kids was, I always want to hear you ask your teacher, what will I be doing tomorrow? And I never want to hear you ask your teacher, what did we do yesterday? Students will be able to understand what is coming because of the online planning, the online platform, and they'll be able to be much more proactive and have that better communication with their teachers, so that they can plan ahead in the event that they have to be out. And the Schoology format is an excellent tool for them to be able to stay caught up with their class while they're out. Unless the event they're deathly sick, they should be able to still do some of that work, instead of just taking 10 days away from school and coming back and say, what do I now have to make up for 2 weeks? It messes up the continuity of their learning. So we're going to work hard to make sure that in the event that kids are home, that they can still stay caught up on their learning and not feel like they're 2 weeks behind when they show back up.
So I think that's really important to kind of stress that idea of continuity of learning and the flexibility that this new structure is going to provide for parents, students, and teachers to have centrally located content that they can access. So to me, that's kind of exciting. I wish I had that when I was in school. We had a lot of people ask what a typical school day might look like if we return to 5 days a week. And specifically, they've heard no recess, kids staying in the same room, no cafeteria. We've talked a little bit about that. And I know that we're still working with public health on those specific issues, but maybe we can talk a little bit more about things like lunchtime and recess time and those other types of kind of group opportunities for socialization that kids need and enjoy so much.
So I would venture down that pathway of working with public health and our principals and looking at our school facilities. We want as much as normal as we can do healthy. So yes, we want to limit, the free-for-all maybe that we used to have, so that we don't have an outbreak that closes an entire school. But we've talked about kind of outside spaces and play on the playground being super important. It was always important, and it's going to continue to be important. We've also talked about getting out of your classroom to get to the lunchroom. Now, it may not be as open as it used to be, but really spread out more, tables and spacing in bigger distances with some smaller group action than what happened before. but we want those parts of play. We're still working on figuring out, what do electives look like? The things that come to everybody's mind, band has a large group of kids coming together and instruments, and we don't know those answers yet, but we will continue to work on those solutions in the next days and weeks about what's that best recommendation going forward. But we definitely want the fun to be in school for kids and adults as much as we want the learning to be in place for kids and adults. So I would say those are things that we're still working on the fine details, but yeah, they have to exist. Kids have to have that social interaction time because they're learning as much during that time as they are during their English and their math classes. We just have to do it differently.
That kind of makes me think that it could be, the structure could be different by each level. I know we've talked about that, and Melissa, I recall you talking a little bit about that in one of our meetings. Can you elaborate on the fact that the structure might be different, whether it's elementary school or middle school or high school?
Yeah, it really depends on the ability for students to kind of self-regulate and be able to be in a different environment. So, I mean, one of the challenges is as the kids get older, it's easier to have them more independent, and as they're younger, it is not. So it's really going to, I think if there was any different scheduling, it would be more so towards the 5-day a week for the younger children, and more so towards the hybrid model for older, is what we would probably see if there was a disparity in how we went back to school.
Yeah, I think that's that makes a lot of sense, and we want to prepare the community for the possibility that it might be a little different, because there are siblings in different schools and different levels. And we have heard from parents that it's important for siblings to have similar schedules, or siblings to have similar schedules. So we're aware of that. We're working on plans like that. But ultimately, I think so much of the structure of school depends on the status of community health at that time. And we were on the brink of moving into the Black Diamond phase this week, which would give us some time and experience with greater restrictions or relaxation of restrictions, and more experience with larger groups of people social distancing together. But that's kind of stalled out. Phil, is that why it's difficult to finalize a plan before mid-July? Do you want to talk a little bit about what our tentative plan is right now to have a more finite, shareable information in July?
You bet. Since we started talking about planning for August, we've always talked about a plan A, B, and C. And plan A is totally normal, 5 days a week for everybody. Plan B is the hybrid model to promote the social distancing, keep smaller cohorts of kids. And plan C has always been totally remote. And we have been reluctant to land on one of those plans because the situation is so fluid. So we have already this summer transitioned between a couple of different phases of relaxation of social distancing. But now we're starting to see a spike in cases locally, and even in half the states in the country, we have a growing rate of spread. And that's delayed our shift into that final phase. So, there are some districts around the state and the nation that made their plans clear in June. Here's what we're going to be doing in August. And most of them have already had to backtrack and say, well, wait a minute, we may not be doing it that way. Let's wait and see what happens. We're going to do it this way. I don't want to make Eagle County schools an emotional yo-yo for families. I don't want to come out with a plan in June that we then change in July, that we then change in August. So we want to take into account as much data as we can. We want to work with as many partners as we can and get as many eyes on our program as possible, and get their feedback and make sure that we can manage it and that it makes sense for our families and our community. So this forum is part of that process. The survey data that we got back is part of that process. And after we complete these this week, our intent is to put together the draft proposal to share with our board at our next meeting on July 8th. And that will be an opportunity for the board to see it in work session, to ask us questions about the feasibility of the plan, to troubleshoot, to find places where it's not going to work, or give us suggestions about what they're hearing from the community. That's their job as board members, is to serve as a conduit from the community to us, to represent their constituents, give us their best thinking as parents and community members about what they'd like to see, and then challenge us with the plan that we provided and make sure that it's the best plan that we can create that meets the needs of everybody in our community. After we've gone through that vetting process with the board on the 8th, which will be a Wednesday, we'll take that Thursday, Friday, and into the weekend if we need to finalize the plan and get something out to the community that week of July 13th. Is that plan going to be carved in stone? Don't count on it. It's going to be the best plan that we can make with the information that we have at the time and the resources that we have available. But we have to recognize that if the COVID situation changes dramatically in the next 6 weeks, we may be shifting more to Plan B or Plan C. But we're right now putting a lot of our eggs into the Plan A basket, trying to get back as normal as we can. And we hope to have those details shared with the community the week of July 13th.
And Phil, I just wanted to piggyback that on that a little bit, in that, you know, if we do need to go to a more remote or a more hybrid type of model, you may not see, like Phil said, your traditional classes in the same way. You know, especially if we get staff that get sick, we're going to have to utilize our staff in different ways. And so you may see, you know, somebody that might have been working as a reading interventionist then becomes a classroom teacher, you know, and then we'll have to figure out how to do the interventions with the kids in a different way. But, you know, something that we are, especially at the elementary level, worried about is the ability to keep building staff if staff start to get sick.
You know, one related question, and again, we are approaching the end here, but this is kind of an interesting idea and a little relevant to what we're talking about right now. And we had 2 people write in and say, have we considered teaching outside in tents and or kind of the temporary structures like we had for red sandstone. So we would bring in, you know, a variety of kind of trailers and or tents to expand, again, the social distancing. And I'm not sure how that would work with our climate or with our budget, but who wants to take that one on?
I know that there are a lot of teachers who on a regular basis take their kids outside. We have outside learning spaces set up at many of our schools. I think of like Red Hill Elementary has a cool place that they've just designed in the last year or two that's got some outdoor theater seating. I know the Battle Mountain campus has multiple places outside where classes can go and sit. Berry Creek has parks right next door. So most of our schools have fields, have outdoor learning environments or stadiums, and that has always been the case. But I think we might see that even more in this coming school year, because we do know that being outside is very helpful because you have better air circulation. In terms of the portable trailers that we use for anytime we have construction of schools, those are okay, but they're not ideal. They're actually more cramped than a regular classroom and not quite as nicely outfitted. So I don't know that we would lean on those too much. And using a tent structure for a daily instruction, we might have some licensing issues with that, but it might be worth exploring.
So I do think that's worth elaborating on just a bit, that we do have licensing requirements. We do have some finite resources that we have to contend with. We have a set number of teachers. All of our classrooms are designed for a certain number of students. We don't have an endless bus fleet, so I think really the challenge, one of the bigger challenges for us is really dealing with the finite restrictions, kind of the creative restrictions, if you will, that are put upon us by the state and others, from finances. So I hope we'll all keep that in mind, that we're working with those restrictions in mind. We had a few comments directed at attendance, teacher check-ins. Are we going to do live recorded classes per week? What about equal opportunities for disadvantaged students? And student accountability. So we took this as a question, or these comments and questions, as it relates to any type of remote or hybrid learning. What types of things, and we've talked a little bit about this. So maybe because we're running out of time, just a real quick summary of our synchronous scheduling and our online resources to just kind of reassert the answer to that question.
Sure, Dan. So in a hybrid model, it's going to be different than 100% remote, because the kids they would have attendance on the days that they're scheduled to be at school. And then on the days that they're at home, we could mark their attendance by whether or not they're completing the tasks that they were supposed to do. In the event that we're in a fully remote model, we're going to be able to keep the scheduling that we had in the hybrid structure. In other words, if you were going to school on Monday and Thursday, you will continue to be expected to show up to your online class on Monday and Thursday at a set time where attendance will be taken. So this was a comment that came through loud and clear in the parent survey, that kids needed that structure, they needed that accountability, they needed that connection with their peers and with their teachers. And we had some teachers who were doing that. They were providing synchronous instruction, but not all. And it wasn't something that was mandated. So those who did it were encouraged by their principals, and they had great success doing so. So that's a lesson. We're a teaching institution, but we're also a learning institution. So we learned from what worked and what didn't work. And we'll try to make sure that we have those structured occasions where kids are checking in online, participating online, and they still have an attendance requirement.
Well, and I think that the parent training in the fall and the Schoology and the one-on-one devices is going to make that easier. Students will be able to turn in assignments, or we'll be able to see if they even got into them, and when they logged in and the amount of time that they've logged in to do things. I also knew that there was a question too, I don't know if we're gonna have time to get to it, but parents were concerned about learning that may have been lost or where their kids are. And so I just wanted to address that we are really looking at making sure that we are assessing all students when they come back in the fall, so we have a good understanding of what gaps may be there in the learning. And we're looking at adjusting and making sure that we're really hitting all those core standards from the state standards of Colorado, and then filling in, if we need to fill in gaps from the prior year, which we're assuming that we do, our teachers are trained and ready to do that. So, don't worry if you feel like your kids got a little bit behind, or if your kids got accelerated, we want to know that as well, so that we can really accommodate them coming back and being able to individualize, kind of where everybody is, but then trying to bring our kids that got a little bit behind back up to that level where we need them now.
Thank you for bringing that up, Melissa. I'm sorry I did miss that. And I do think it's very important. I think it is something that's on the minds of parents, and we routinely do that on an annual basis, and can just kind of be more sensitive to it this year. One final comment and concern that came in kind of later today is a concern that decisions are being made top down without the input of those with most knowledge of each unique building, and disappointment that the survey was done online and with the knowledge that a large percentage of our population struggles with internet connections and disappointment with the percentage of Spanish-speaking responses. Phil or Melissa, Amy, can you talk about the way in which that we are meeting with our ad team partners and have been working with levels and building leaders as we move forward, and maybe address the concerns just about the format of the survey? I'm not sure how we could have done the survey in a more effective manner, and we did have an extremely high response rate in general. A lot of our Latino parents speak English, so they could have responded to either English or Spanish survey.
And yeah, I'm happy to address that. Let's talk about the first part of the question was about schools having the ability to develop their plan, understanding their own school needs. So for the last 6 weeks, we've been meeting weekly with groups of principals at levels. So in other words, all the elementary principals are meeting together, middle school principals are meeting together, high school principals are meeting together. The intent is to share their best thinking. And I can say that none of their plans look exactly the same. We have provided them with some expectations that we're going to try to start the school year at elementary and at middle school going 5 days a week, that we need to have a hybrid model ready to go. And once that hybrid model is in place, we might need to then have ready the remote model. So we are providing the expectations, but they are designing the specifics of what their schedules look like based on what their families want and need, what their staff is ready and able and willing to do, and what their students' needs are. So we have always been a district with a lot of autonomy in different schools. That's why we have some schools that are IB and some schools that have gone down the road of experiential learning. And we have a ski academy, and we have a charter school. We have dual language schools. So we respect the individuality of each school and want their character to be clear in the plan that they create for their schools. If the whole thing was top down, we wouldn't be having this conversation, and it would be a quicker, more efficient way to plan for next year. But that's not how I operate. That's not how the team operates. That's not how our board operates. So we definitely want to make sure we get community voice into our process so that the product reflects the values of the community. To that end, we've got this meeting tonight. We've got the meeting tomorrow night in Spanish. You can call into that. I think most families have access to a cell phone. The directions are available online at our website in English and Spanish, and that can also be accessed on a telephone. And if they want to come in person, they're welcome too. We'll be at the boardroom at Spring Creek down in Gypsum. So capacity would be limited into that facility to only 10 people, but we can certainly take phone calls and get people online. So we're running as an inclusive process as we possibly can, and want to, again, the product to reflect the values of the community.
So Phil, one thing I would love to just add is that we want to work with our schools on that choice, and parents and students, we want to work with them on that choice of what does it look like. We're going to set the parameters, but within those parameters, I think families will get to make some choices about what they think is best for their individual kids in their family. Like, is it the virtual World Academy option? Is it the hybrid option? And those are going to be important things as we move ahead in and out of the school year. Sometimes the choices won't be optional. Like we will have to close if there's an outbreak. Those kinds of things will eliminate that choice, but there's also the choice on the front end. And we want each of our families to be connected to our school district. So working with teachers and principals and district office staff is going to be super important to meet the needs of kids.
Well, and Amy, to add on that too, so if we ended up having to go to the hybrid model, I think some families, we would probably just start alphabetically to try and get families on the same schedule. But if families would prefer to have different schedules. Maybe you have a stay-at-home parent and that parent can only handle working with one student a day, not 2 or 3. Families then would be able to come back and make requests. We would still have to keep the capacity in those rooms at 10 or, whichever number we came up with, 10 to 15. But I think that there could be some flexibility in families, if we had to go to the hybrid model, being able to figure out what works better for them in that model.
I would just add, thanks for that, Melissa. And I would just add to the last end of that last question is that prior to the outbreak, when we were reading the tea leaves in February and developing our pandemic plan, our ed tech team did send out a poll and did it in many ways to determine the number of people that would need internet devices, the number of students that would need Chromebooks, the number of families that would need wireless hotspots. So we have been very responsive. All of our communications has been translated and bilingual. And, I do think that there's some fixation on the survey as being the only point of input. But all of our social media, every day, our daily conversation, that's all bilingual. And we get a lot of comments and a lot of feedback from our parents. We're also participating in Latino outreach groups that are happening at the community level with many partners. So I do think that we are certainly listening and certainly being responsive to those to our Latino families. They're very important to us.
Well, and our tech department, everybody's been working really hard to figure out how we can get connectivity for those families that were not able to have it, because we need that set up before we start anything this fall. And I think also the one-on-one devices, we had a lot of families that maybe even elected not to take devices, but then ran into challenges later because the parents needed those devices for work, and or they weren't set up with all the security and the passwords behind them. And so even parents that thought that they didn't need the devices, it was a challenge. So that's why we are really looking at that district issued one-on-one device for every student.
Melissa, can I just do a plug for that importance of, if anybody has an outstanding device, to get it back so that it can be refurbished for next year is super important. I didn't say that earlier, and you just made me think of that.
We're missing just a few 100.
Well, that is going to bring us to the end of the panel discussion tonight. We've gone through the questions that have been answered so far. I just wanted to point out that this is a challenge to be on a call this long, a video call this long for 2 hours. We're very grateful for everybody that stuck with us the entire time. I think at one point I noticed we were up to about 100 people, and we still have 60 hearty souls left with us. So thank you for that. We have put a link in the chat window to a form to give us feedback on this meeting. It's 1 or 2 quick questions. Did you like the format? Did you hate the format? Did you feel like, even if your question wasn't answered directly, the subject of your question was addressed? We are keeping our Google form open so that you can continue to ask questions on our Google form. And we will eventually pull together a series maybe of frequently asked questions that we will post on our Facebook and on our website. And just to reiterate, our timeline is to carry forward a plan to the board on July 8th, make some necessary revisions, and then share it more broadly with the public, hopefully the week of the 13th. And I would just ask our panelists, first of all, thank you to the parents and folks that stayed with us. Thank you also, though, to the panelists for answering the questions. Phil, do you want to lead us off, or any of you can? Just some final thoughts to leave the community with as we close out tonight.
I think the final thought is to just recognize that we're trying to provide continuity of learning. That's our primary goal, but we have to do that in balance with safety and health of our students. And if we tilt really far to the safety and health side, it makes it challenging to provide that continuity of learning. And if we tip too far to continuity of learning, then we've sacrificed health and safety of students. So in a time where the situation is constantly changing, we're constantly adjusting that balance to try to provide the service that's best suited to the values of our community, the needs of our kids, with the resources we have and the information that we're working with. And I appreciate everybody's patience as we try to develop that plan.
Melissa or Amy, anything you want to add to that, or?
No, I mean, again, I just wanted to thank everyone in the community. I know it's hard not to have a definitive answer at any point. And so, thank you for your patience and your flexibility as we wait and navigate what's going to happen with outbreaks in our community. We just don't want to promise something and then not be able to deliver on it, or, make accommodations in a way that might be more restrictive than we would need to. So, thank you all. We really, really appreciate it. Read with your kids this summer. I know that they're all taking a break right now. Do everything you can to, keep them engaged in some way academically this summer. Thanks.
And I would just add that continuing ahead, we're a team and we're got to do this together. We're working on things we've never done before from a school and a home front, that importance of working together to do the best we can.
All right. And I think I want to wish Amy's dad a happy birthday. And on that,
Hey, wait, you have to say that again. Wait 1 second. Say it again now.
Happy birthday.
Who's that?
Just say it.
Hello, happy birthday. Thank you. Thank you.
Happy birthday. Sorry, I ran it.
Everybody say happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
It's all the way.
Thanks, you guys.
All the way from the Rocky Mountains. He's got friends in high places, as we like to say. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.